Hi. So welcome. I'm so glad you all are here, and I'm going to talk about PFLAG parenting style disrupting gender bias. My name's Alison Wood. As Cindy introduced me, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm an art therapist. My pronouns are she, her. I'm just going to click the slide here. Just a little bit about me. See, I grew up in Manhattan Beach, and I moved to New York City, where I lived for about 20 years. I'm a bisexual cisgender woman. My pronouns she, her. I'm a mom of two. I have a master's in creative arts therapy and a master's in marriage and family therapy. I've worked in the LGBTQIA community, providing social services since 1998, and as an LGBTQIA affirming psychotherapist since 2007. I'm also a feminist, and I do my best in my work and my life to promote equality and appreciation for all genders. And, you know, I just want to say tonight that this is a really big topic, talking about gender stereotypes, gender bias, sexism. We're going to touch on some intersectionality. And the intention tonight is to just start noticing how gender bias is all around us, how it's in us. And I know that everyone that's here is really committed to growing in a way that benefits their kids' capacity to grow in their best way, to become their best selves. And so I'm happy to just be here to get the wheels turning, or keep spinning, keep in motion the ones that are already spinning on this topic, because it really is talking about gender bias and starting to notice how it comes up and impacts our kids and impacts us. It's just another important way we can support our kids. So I'm glad everyone's here, and we'll see where the conversation takes us. Okay. So what is gender bias? Gender bias is behavior that shows favoritism towards one gender over another, typically but not always rooted in misogyny. And gender stereotypes organize behaviors, characteristics, interests, and attitudes into binary gender ideals and roles that lead to gender bias. So I have a quick riddle for the group. Let me see, okay. A quick riddle for the group. A man and his son are in a terrible accident, and they're rushed to the hospital in critical care. The doctor looks at the boy and exclaims, "I can't operate on this boy, it's my son." How could this be? Maybe if you have an answer, you can stick it in the chat, but see if we see where that goes. Okay, so what obvious ideas or expressions come to mind that demonstrate our culture's gender stereotypes and bias? Sometimes it's obvious statements like, women are irrational, boys or men don't cry, take it like a man, sit like a lady, or pink is a girl color, or blue is a boy color. And some examples of gender bias and stereotypes are found in our assumptions about home life, like women do the cooking and cleaning and childcare, and men handle finances, cars, and home repair. And some of those biases very much impact how our relationships are organized. I think they've done some research in the pandemic that has shown that women have disproportionately carried the workload, being tasked with this traditional role of the childcare on top of the work they're already doing outside of the home. Just going to check the chat. Okay. Okay. All right. You got it. All right. Okay. So sometimes gender bias is more subtle, like assuming the gender of a person because of their occupation, or assumptions like all authority figures are men. Or maybe it's like the way I'm wearing this blazer tonight to project authority because it's associated with men. So someone got the answer to the riddle. I'm wondering if anybody else did. This is great. Okay, so some people are saying, so the riddle's answer is that it's the mother, right? So we assume the doctor is a man. That's an example of gender bias. But also, I like this, a couple people presented the idea of that maybe it's a same-sex couple, right? So then then the doctor would be a man. I like that. Okay. can't see people and my screen at the same time, so apologies if I'm toggling back and forth. Okay. So in media, we also see expectations, norms, and stereotypes around physical appearance, right? Hyperfemininity and hypermasculinity. And then we have to consider how gendered our language is and what impact that has on shaping our expectations and bias. So I was just watching the new season of Survivor with my kid, and Jeff Probst said that he has, for the whole series, used this expression, "come on in, guys," and he was wondering aloud if that is still applicable. Is that outdated? And he generated a conversation about it with the contestants. It was really great, and he said he wanted to get rid of it, and people agreed. My 12-year-old had his own ideas about it, and that'll come up later in the presentation. Okay, so let's put on our thinking caps. Just take a deep breath. And if you want to kind of close your eyes and throw a line back and reflect about what cultural ideas that come to mind, or expressions that come to mind that demonstrate gender stereotypes and bias that you learned growing up. Think about what subtle or not so subtle messages you received about gender roles and norms. When we stop and think about it, we start to notice how gendered language and attitudes are, and how most of us are presented with really clear binary rules about how boys and girls, men and women should think, act, behave. How do you think that this has impacted your relationship to your own gender or to the gender of others? How have those ideas changed or expanded over time, or stayed the same? Let's consider how these constructs shaped or even limited your experience. Where or when could you have benefited from greater flexibility in gender roles or expectations? What interests, activities, or behaviors were you drawn to that you were encouraged or discouraged based on your gender? If you have something burning to share that's coming up, please put it in the chat. Now we come back to this moment. How have those experiences shaped your parenting? How might your kids be impacted by gender stereotypes, gendered language, expectations, and bias? Adults project their bias onto kids all the time. Like when the little boy is asked if he has any girlfriends, you hear that a lot, which that's not only a gender bias, but it's also heterosexist. Or when the little girl is in the store and they give her a sticker that has the princess on it instead of, the monster or the basketballs. Sometimes we'll describe their child as all boy. I don't even know, what does that mean, right? I dressed my second son in pink all the time as a baby, and people interacted with him really differently. And there's lots of research on how we talk and handle boy babies versus girl babies. People are thinking about boys being interested in cooking, girls liking to play sports. So once you connect to how it was for you growing up, we're going to think about how it was for your kids, right? When we notice how binary ideas about gender are all around us and in us, then we can start to make choices about how we want to disrupt that bias in our own parenting, in our parenting actions and attitudes, and the environment that we create for our kids. And we're going to talk about some specifics, ways that we're going to address that. Secondarily, and this is an extra bonus, is that cultivating this expansive way of thinking about gender and identity for our kids can also serve to generate a greater sense of freedom for ourselves and our own expression, and maybe the things that we didn't get to do that we wanted to do, or we weren't allowed, right? Okay. So I'm off on my slides here. There we go. Okay. Moving on. All right. So gender stereotypes compounded and intersecting with other stereotypes have a disproportionate negative impact on certain groups, right? So this is where intersectionality comes in. And we think about gender bias invites more conversation around the intersection of identities with regard to race, class, sexuality, and ability in order to better understand privileges and barriers attached to various overlapping identities. So inviting conversations with our kids about intersectional identities can help us recognize the biases we want to disrupt, while also we can teach our kids how to embrace, affirm, and advocate for the multiple aspects of their identities, right? We all have kids that are identified as LGBTQ, which means that in gender identity and sexual orientation, that they're on the intersectional graph, that's gonna combine with other parts of their identity. Then sometimes it's gonna mean that they have challenges that other cisgender or heterosexual people don't have, right? If you're not familiar with the theory of intersectionality, I put a link down there, which also will be on the list of resources to learn a little bit about it. It was introduced in 1989 by Columbia law professor and scholar Kimberly Crenshaw. And the basic idea is that structures and systems of discrimination and inequality impact people differently based on overlapping or intersecting parts of their identity. So, for example, a hetero cis white woman may be marginalized due to gender, but not experience systemic discrimination due to race or sexual identity. However, a lesbian cis Black woman will likely experience discrimination due to her sexual identity, race, and gender. Okay, what's important about noticing gender bias anyway? Why are we here, right? Gender bias impacts the sense of freedom our kids feel to grow into themselves and their comfortability to explore and share their developing interests, identity, and sense of self, right? So we think back to that memory we connected with of something maybe we wanted to do that we didn't feel like we were allowed to do based on our gender. Gender bias says, you have to be either a boy or a girl. Girls do this, boys do that. Girls shouldn't do this, boys shouldn't do that. This is what it means to be a man. This is what it means to be a woman. Men behave like this, women behave like that. And these are messages not just, as parents, but like out in the world, right? All around us. And it's limiting, right? So when a child's internal experience doesn't match the binary gender norms, shame can develop and have a negative impact on their identity development and overall mental health. And especially when we don't know what's going on in them when they're young, if we're kind of presenting them these binary ideas or stereotypes about gender and offering them as how they're supposed to be, then they're really at risk because they might not have the words or understanding yet. And then they internalize that as something wrong in them, right? And also as PFLAG parents, we all know that the risk of depression, anxiety, substance use, suicidality is directly impacted by family support. And the way we handle gender bias is another opportunity for us to give the kind of support that benefits our children's overall mental health and development. And just in general, I think as parents, as best we can, we should not tell our kids who they are or should be, right? But rather support them to feel safe and supported as they figure it out. So just a quick note on development before we move on. Kids recognize gender differences in people around age 1.5 to 2 years old and typically have a sense of their own gender around 3 to 5. That's typical. It's not like that for everyone. And their ideas, behaviors, and interests, statements about gender can be more fluid at that age, especially if they feel like they're free to explore in that way. But it's also developmentally appropriate and expected that at various stages of development, kids demonstrate kind of rigid ideas about gender norms and roles. So it's important to know that we don't need to convince them at any stage that what they think is right or wrong, but just model and neutrally reflect an expansive attitude about gender, right? Gently offer a counter idea. So for instance, when your child says, only girls wear dresses, suggest that dresses are just clothes and clothes are for everybody. And then you can share that there was a time when girls and women could not wear pants. What would that have been like? Does that sound fair? So we can just model curiosity and critical thinking about where our ideas and norms come from. Are they because we are that way or because we're told to be that way? Depending on their age, you can go a little deeper. Questions like, can we allow ourselves and others the freedom to do things differently? What's so important about being rigid and binary about gender anyway? How does that benefit some people at the potential expense of others, right? This is where we take it a little deeper. So when Jeff Probst was having that conversation, my 12-year-old, who identifies as boy, was a little outraged. Oh, you know, he just said, we don't need to change anything. He's right? He was very defensive of Jeff. He just wanted Jeff to feel like he's doing a good job. And so we had to have a conversation about it. And, you know, he took it in. And I think once he saw how that it impacted, you know, once the contestants, one of them opened up and kind of talked about what it was for them and their experience, he softened and could kind of empathize a little bit more with how everyone wants to feel included and seen, and how that phrasing is exclusionary, right? And it's outdated. It's not where we're at. We are learning more and more that binary ideas about gender just do not apply to so many people, and that stereotypes around masculinity and femininity don't apply either. So we want to keep that in mind as we move through the world, so we don't alienate anybody or you know, create an environment where someone develops a shame or like they can't be their authentic selves, right? I did have to you know, tell my son that he was a little bit on the wrong side of history with his opinion, and that was received. Okay, so be a gender disruptor. Here are the practical tips. This is what you came for. All right, so let's consider conversations or attitudes about hairstyles and clothing. I'm going to change boy styles versus girl styles to non-gendered descriptive terms. That idea of describing, just describe things accurately, right? That is such a great tool when talking about anything, right? Why did we have to label it as like in some category that's like an arbitrarily assigned stereotype, right? We can just be descriptive. Short hairstyles, long hairstyles, right? Purchase clothing that's gender neutral or from both the boys and the girls sections. And just by the way, when you do that, you'll notice how short the girls' shorts are versus the boys' shorts are, which is like a topic for a whole other presentation. But it just, you know, you start to notice how things are really different for boys and for girls, right? Help your child notice how stores divide clothing, toys, and activities by binary gender. And be curious what they think about that. Instill the notion that you can't assume someone's gender identity based on how they look, right? And again, depending on their age, they might have strict binary ideas about gender, and that can be typical. And it's okay to validate their perspective while also inviting conversation by noticing aloud greater variation of gender experience, and then name the limitations created by binary gender stereotypes, right? All right. For young children, or I mean, you know, any age child that likes to do dress up, go for it. I still like to dress up sometimes. Provide dress up clothes that invite creativity and encourage play with all gender expressions. Dresses, pants, ties, scarves, tutus, hats, vests, etc. for everybody, right? Kids love to pretend to be like the adults in their lives, regardless of gender. And this kind of creative play is normal, and it's an important part. It's crucial to their development because it's the way they internalize the most vital people in their lives, right? That they're pretending to be the people that are most important to them. And it's not about gender. So the little boy can be like mom and the little girl can be like dad. And that's how they're taking those people in, right? Because of gender bias, we tend to encourage caretaking activities for girls and demonstrations of fortitude in boys, but we all know that caring behaviors and displays of strength are important qualities for all humans to cultivate regardless of their gender. So along those same lines, in addition to dress-up clothes, toys, okay? Provide access to all types of toys, dolls, blocks, cars, pretend play kitchen, tea sets for everyone, and don't shy away from buying a pink toy for the boy and a blue toy for the girl, or better yet, just avoid buying gendered toys altogether. Say out loud, there's no such thing as boy toys and girl toys, boy colors and girl colors. Encourage your child to take the lead and support their exploration and delight in the sharing of what they naturally gravitate towards, right? That sometimes we might catch ourselves redirecting our kids towards the things that we think they should be doing or will want. But if we just give them space to be themselves and let them take the lead, wow, we got so much to learn, and they feel so much safer letting us know what's going on inside them and who they are. It's kind of beautiful. When you provide options, you can provide choice and just avoid any purchases of items informed by the idea of like, you should have this because you're a boy, or you should have this because, or you should want it because you're a girl. Children generally develop an innate sense of their gender between 3 and 5 and start to understand direct and indirect messages about what's okay and what's not okay for them to play with. So they might not have the language, but they're noticing all the time, and they're always looking for cues to see if what they're doing is okay, right? That's where it comes in to be so important that we are connected to what our biases are so that we can be in charge of them and make choices about how much of that we want to share or not share, right? So we're going to allow our kids to be who they are in the moment. We're sometimes really quick to label our kids. We don't always have to know what something is for them. You know, we can let it play out and see what happens. We can model flexibility and acceptance of the fluidity that best supports their identity development. And there's a great quote in the documentary, I hope we have time to watch, the little bit from the parent says, I'm creating a space for my child to trust me because I'm showing them that I trust them, right? That's a beautiful idea. Okay, give a range of choice in activities and encourage your kids to try a little of everything. Support engagement in extracurricular activities of their interest and notice if there are things that are being avoided because by them or by you because of norms around gender. And be sure to encourage participation in those too, or at least offer it, right? It's so important to talk about any pressures your kids may feel to participate or not participate in certain activities because of norms around gender. Do you have a little one that really likes to dance, but they're not sure they get to go to ballet, right? Okay. Offer inclusive books and media that tell stories with transgender and gender expansive characters, as well as promote narratives that challenge traditional gender roles and greater fluidity with regard to gender expression. Call out what gender biases or stereotypes you notice in books and media and encourage your kids to do the same. Be curious about what they think and feel about how people are represented. Especially notice and talk about representation of intersectional identities with regard to race, class, sexuality, and ability. Representation is so important, and how people are represented is even more important. I have to say that things have come a long way, right? Even in the last couple of years, there's a lot more media that's available that includes LGBTQIA lead characters, and that their stories are positive and not just about these parts of their identity, but that they're just being normalized and presented as people of the world, right? Which is what they are and always have been. So that's great. Oh, and we have, if you just do like a Google search for shows with LGBTQ characters for teens or for kids, you can get some good lists. I like put some of the resources I found here. And also on our PFLAG website, we have a lot of books and resources listed there too. Okay. Support your kids being themselves by creating an environment that lets them tell you who they are first. You can do this by using gender neutral terminology. It also reinforces the idea that you cannot assume someone's gender based on how they look, right? So take the opportunity to be gender neutral in your speech when possible. For instance, referring to you're at the park and you refer to the child as opposed to saying the boy or the girl over there. This also, this is how we teach our kids that their gender identity can't be understood by how someone's look, right? That we can't assume that. Also, do you describe boys and girls with gendered language like handsome and pretty? You can apply those words to everyone. I tell my sons they're pretty all the time, and I call myself handsome. Why not? It's accurate. They are pretty. My boys are very pretty. Find terms of endearment not related to gender. Think of expressions like, that's my boy, and just turn it into, that's my kid. As parents, we can help each other with this. So sometimes my husband will refer to the kids as the boys, and then I just respond by talking about the kids. Because while my kids have declared their gender, I also know they're young and that they get permission to explore what that means for them and also grow and develop. So I don't want to make any assumptions. Avoid commonly used gender expressions and expectations of behavior like being manly or manning up or ladylike, all boy or girly girl. You know, it's not just like saying these things to our kids because we might kind of eye roll like, yeah, I'm not going to like tell my 6-year-old to man up. But, you know, if I said that to my husband or my husband's with friends and they're saying that, right, that the kids notice and take that in. So degender words like fireman and policeman by using more accurate terms, firefighter, police officer. Notice what assumptions of gender you make when you talk about certain professions. If your child has not declared their gender yet, you don't have to tell them who they are. Depending on their age, there can be fluidity. So again, like my 6-year-old has talked about wanting to change genders at various times for various reasons over the years. Generally, he describes himself as a boy, but I just go with it, right? Checking the time. Okay, provide inclusive and gender neutral sex education. Genitals do not equal gender identity. Some bodies have penises, some bodies have vaginas. Some bodies are born with reproductive or sexual anatomy that doesn't fit the boxes of female or male, or they're a combination of both, right? Disrupt the idea that secondary sex characteristics define gender. Talk about bodies and sex using examples from a variety of experiences, identities, and relationships. And for help with this, you can check out Tip Sheet Gender Sexuality Inclusive Sex Ed PDF online from the Healthy Teen Network, which I put in the resources, or books like Sex is a Funny Word, What Makes a Baby is a great one for the 6 and under. Planned Parenthood's website is a really great resource too. So sex education should start much younger than most of us think, pretty much from the beginning, because even young kids need to talk about sex and bodies accurately. When we don't talk about things or we speak vaguely about topics, kids notice, and then they can internalize a fear or a shame around those topics, right? This gets in the way of them asking questions or getting information that can empower them to take care of themselves and make good choices, especially with regard to sexual health, sexual activity, and consent, right? We know that kids that get really good sex education, like thorough, inclusive, accurate sex education, do make better choices for themselves and tend to have healthier sex lives. Okay. So name body parts appropriately, normalize exploration, curiosity, model body positivity. No one ever died of awkwardness or embarrassment, as far as I know. So it's just so important to talk with our kids about this. And yeah, it's a topic for another presentation. Actually, we had a really great presentation on this last year, which I think we can find on the website. So lead by example and model fluidity of gender roles in your own home. Are there household tasks, expectations, or behaviors assigned by traditional or conventional gender roles that you want to change? They very likely reflect the heteronormative paradigm that defines most relationship dynamics in our culture. Who's in charge of what in the household tasks? What things do you do because of influence from social norms related to gender? Do you have permission to question those norms and expectations? Is it working for you? Do you have different expectations for your kids' behavior and responsibilities based on their gender? Does your extended family? Talk about how you came to have those roles and expectations and what works for you, and about what you might want to change. Express curiosity about your kids' experiences and perspectives on the gender roles in your household. Share with them how biases about your own identity as defined by gender, race, class, sexuality, and ability have impacted who you are and what choices and opportunities or experiences you've had. Ask them what messages they get from media, teachers, advertising that create their gender biases. Okay. I kind of laugh because when I had my first child, some kind of 50s switch flipped in my mind, and I decided like I had to make lunch for my husband when he left for work outside the house and cook dinner every night. And I had to like really kind of wonder, like, what is that about? Like, whose idea is that, and does that work for me? And it really didn't. And then over time, I'm really grateful in my relationship that we've kind of passed the baton back and forth in terms of like who's primarily responsible for household or like traditionally like women's duties, right? And that we've kind of turned it on our heads, but it's involved a lot of conversation and a lot of checking in with ourselves about what are our ideas and what are the ideas that we've just kind of been programmed to have. Okay, as an official PFLAG parent gender bias disruptor, which you now all are because you have been through the training, we're gonna notice, right? Which is what you've already started doing tonight, and just that brief reflection that you gave yourselves. You're gonna name it. You're gonna speak up when you see someone directly or indirectly reinforcing gender stereotypes or bias. You're gonna be curious with your kids and ask questions to learn what they notice and think. The kids are so evolved, so much more evolved than most of us on this topic. And that's so great because they can teach us a lot. And also the onus falls on us to teach ourselves, right? That we don't want to rely on them for telling us how we're supposed to be. We want to do some of that work on our own, and then also be curious about what they know and what they think about it. So communicate, talk about it, watching shows, visiting relatives, commercials, school, talk about gender stereotypes and bias and what you notice and how different people have different attitudes about it, right? And how you want to have it in your family. Model, give yourself and those around you the permission to disrupt gender stereotypes in your own life, in your behaviors, roles, and expectations, right? Taking notice of gender bias creates opportunities for choice and ultimately expands our ability to authentically express ourselves and encourage others to do the same. It's like the Matrix. Once you start to see it, you can't stop seeing it, right? And it also takes some time to retrain our automatic thoughts and associations as we raise our kids more expansively. It's a process of heightening our awareness to norms, attitudes, and stereotypes that often go unnoticed in the way they shape our sense of self and others. Okay, so being here tonight is helping to make that happen. Okay, so this is my little anecdote. So when I became a parent, I did start the process of wondering how to best engage my children in conversations around gender bias. And I've employed all of the strategies listed above at various times as a parent. And when my firstborn was 5, I really delighted in teaching him to recite this phrase, "We don't conform to antiquated gender stereotypes." And he got it. And we would say it with abandon. And one day we went to the library and he had nail polish on his fingers. And the librarian said, "Oh, your sister must have done that to you." He doesn't have a sister. And why it had to be about a girl, I don't know. So he said, "We don't conform to antiquated gender stereotypes." And it was like the most marvelous, thrilling parenting moment of my life. and a point of pride that I will take with me into, hopefully very old age. And it also has been a conversation starter because we would tell that story to people and then we got to talk about this topic, right? And start to get the wheels turning for other folks around how they want to disrupt gender bias in their own lives and their parenting. So I think we have time to check out the movie. Let's see if
Ellie, how long is that?
It's 9 minutes.
Because I just want to be sure we have some time to like open for discussion too. So what do you think? Do you think we have time to do both of those things?
Let's see. Well, we'd only have a few minutes, but I think this is really great, like kind of bookend to this topic, because it shows parents that are it's just a short documentary about a couple who's raising their child gender neutral and what they describe as gender creative parenting. So I think it just can give kind of a window into, you know, how some people are employing this, right?
Okay.
And I think we'll make sure we get some talking in. Let's see. Okay. This was shared with me by the director at Manhattan Beach Nursery School and also Laura Dotson, who's here. So shout out. Uh-oh, what happened? We need some. Okay.
Does your deodorant keep you fresh all day? We put Dove Mint deodorant.
They get you, those commercials. Is the volume okay?
I think on our first date, we talked about, do you want kids?
A lot of people, their initial reaction is, oh, this is so different. It must be wrong.
What if I'm not being the right dad or not being the right mom? Or what if what I'm doing is really damaging them? And some people can get really like personally offended. Like, how dare you do this? I was very excited looking around our tiny apartment, like, where are we going to put a baby?
Okay.
Baby grape. Ungrape the baby.
Okay, Gray. I was so excited to parent. I've wanted to be a parent since I was 16 years old. It's one of the most challenging and also one of the most rewarding things I've ever done in my life. Hey, kiddo.
Oh, gotta get the booty in. The question of, is this a boy? Is this a girl? As long as that's still an unknown, people act much more neutrally. So if we're raising Gray in a gender neutral / gender creative way, Gray can be who they want to be without the strictures that society puts on so many kids so early on.
See all the birds? Look, there's another one.
From the minute someone finds out a child's sex, the tone of your voice, the way that you speak, the way that you handle a child changes in little ways that most people go, oh, it's not a big deal, but it can be because it builds up.
These unconscious biases that we hold around gender, they absolutely frame the path that our children think that they can go down.
The ones that are born with penises get much more rougher handled and people's voices get lower. And oh, you're a tough guy, buddy. And hi, princess, higher voices, softer tones. We really wanted to minimize that as much as humanly possible because without those expectations, kids are free to be whoever they want to be. We really wanted everyone to treat Gray the way you would any other child, regardless of gender. I was born and raised in rural Wyoming. I always knew I was different. I couldn't put my finger on what it was. I think my mom wanted a very feminine, girly girl daughter. I wore a lot of pink dresses. I knew pretty immediately something about this isn't right, but I just didn't know who was safe or what was safe. the inside, I felt alone and isolated and at times afraid. And when things really became overwhelming and seemingly unapproachable, I would turn to suicidal thoughts. But luckily, I had family and friends who were there for me. And I remember eating dinner, I remember looking at them going, when am I gonna grow my penis? Both my parents were just kind of frozen, and then they had to be like, oh, you don't grow one.
The amazing Tiffany.
How do you know that you're queer? Like, everybody questions it.
All right, just talk to me.
It's so silly because if you flip it, you're like, how did you know you were straight? Why would you ever ask that? It's just like the assumption that you're straight. And so I struggled a lot with that. I think about all of the people that I know who are trans or non-binary, whose experiences growing up were traumatic. And I think knowing that I want to be a parent who hopefully is creating space for my child to trust me because I'm showing that I trust them. You ready? Sorry, excuse us.
How old is she?
They are 15 months old. We actually use they, them pronouns. We're great until they tell us who they are. That's why you were like, who, what?
Oh, wow. Okay, so
They.
they. Awesome. Well, enjoy the Pride Parade.
Did you say thank you? Thank you. We are pulling apart this idea of sex, which is related to genitals, and gender, which is related to how you move in the world. So what you wear, how you share your identity with other people, all of those things are related to gender. Whereas sex is really biology, genitals, it's about it.
I mean, we're lucky. We're in the best. We're probably one of the best places we could be in being in Brooklyn, to find some really good, inclusive schools that are going to respect what we're doing.
Like, regardless, people are going to gender our kid. I know we're going to have a conversation as they get a little bit older about like what their genitals are expected to mean at some point. And that will be related to why people will gender you in a certain way. Because you don't want them to feel all that stigma and shame that you're already feeling and filtering for them. But then the hard part is they're engaging in the world.
And this could just be me, but it feels like a lot of people are quick to, they're like, oh yeah, you're gonna mess up your kids. And it's like, well, every parent has learned something from the parents before them. I mean, when we were kids, I don't remember wearing a seatbelt. Like, ever.
Gray's gonna grow up and probably experience some shame and stigma around the way that we raised them. And that's okay. And we're gonna have conversations about that. And also talk about why we made the decisions we made. Where's the baby? How old is he? How old is he?
Yeah, they're 20.
20. What's your name?
No, so we use the singular they. Like if you don't know someone uses he or she, you say they.
I don't think you have to prepare them. I think they already are prepared in birth. This happens naturally. Because I think what you're doing is you're changing the pattern of life. Where I just allowed the child. I mean, I have so many people, little girls that I thought were so feminine, but they turned out to be very masculine.
That's basically what we're doing in a different way. It's just kind of like everything's an option, and they'll decide.
I didn't do it, and let it become.
Yeah. Think you're pretty snoozy, kid.
Gender creative parenting is only this like tiny facet of what we're doing as parents. We're making hundreds of decisions every single day.
What books do you read your child, or what toys do you let them play with? Did you do bottles? Did you formulate? Did you breastfeed? Did you both? Did you do this? Did you do that?
Great, come back.
For me, the hardest thing is sometimes other parents being really critical. We're not saying everyone has to do this. We're not saying that this is for everyone. But for us, this is one of those things of risk mitigation is what we're trying to accomplish. As long as they're happy, that's really all that matters to us.
Oh, look what's up.
You're wearing your birthday outfit.
families are really supportive and they try really hard. And sometimes they make mistakes at our daycare. They're trying. It's in our file that we use they, them pronouns.
Really, the goal here is it's not about me trying to force anything on Gray. It's actually the exact opposite. And we don't know their gender yet. And when they tell us, they'll tell us, and it might change over time, and that's okay too.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Gray. Happy birthday to you.
Okay. I'm going to stop the screen share.